first coloured player ever to have been at Wick.
Regis taking it well on the chest, and a lovely piece of control by Regis. Oh, and what a great shot! Oh, one of the goals of the season. Cyril Regis.
What a goal! A splendid goal by Luther Blissett.
Barnes! Yes! Flips it into Michael Thomas. Thomas's shot! Oh, that's a fine goal! My goodness, England have scored! Sol Campbell! And it flashed past Hedman into the net. Andy Cole, 2 minutes on the field as a half-time substitute. And a great piece of finishing from Cole.
It's a wonderful run from Bergkamp, following up his Vieira. Now Ian Wright! He's broken the record! And history knows for certain now that Ian Wright is the most potent weapon ever in the Arsenal.
Great moments from football's Hall of Fame, given to us by some of the finest black players of recent generations. But why has success on the pitch never been matched by the opportunities off it, particularly for those black players wishing to stay in the game? My name's Jonathan Joseph, also known as Spoonie, and tonight we will look at why we don't often see the faces of some of our finest former black players in the dugouts of clubs up and down the country. Remember the likes of Cyril Regis, Luther Blissett, Michael Thomas, Paul Parker, Des Walker and Andrew Cole. The list goes on. Where are they now in the game they graced? This is Total Blackout, and over the next hour we're going to examine the reasons why right now only 2 out of 92 professional football clubs employ a black manager, while around 1 in 4 players are black. But why? Is it that black players lack the desire or ambition to move into management, or don't have the personal confidence or right role models to follow? Or is it that a black player's skills are readily accepted and valued on the pitch, but not by fans and in the boardroom once they're finished playing? In the opening half of this programme, we'll hear the testimony of those black players who have been there and done it, as well as those who wanted to manage but never got the chance. But before we can go forward to explore the many complex reasons for this glaring imbalance in the modern game, perhaps we need to step back momentarily to an era not so long ago when black players had to fight just for acceptance.
Boy, why don't you go down to trials for Chelsea? I said, are you having me on, son?
Did you say it like that?
I said it, you're having a laugh.
When I first played for Arsenal at 17 in 1979, I was the only black player in the team at that time.
When I was a professional footballer, you asked your opinion, but you could never, ever give your honest opinion because people will label you, as a lot of black players were. If I'd come out with the things that I thought, I would have been labelled that I had a chip on my shoulder or the problem was mine.
So Regis, once again, some unsavoury barracking of the black players from certain sections of the crowd, which says nothing for their sportsmanship at all.
Particularly when you went to play away at grounds like West Ham, Chelsea, Leeds, Sunderland, Everton. You know, those were the main ones that I can remember were difficult grounds to go and play as a black player.
I'm afraid, Mike, I think a lot of the crowd are actually booing John Barnes, which I find sad.
I remember when I was going to move to Sunderland in 1984. The manager was Len Ashurst. Before he actually brought me to the football club, he had to go to the supporters and ask them what your feelings would be if I brought a black player into the football club.
Even when I scored and it was 1-0, no, a black man scored, we don't class that as a goal.
You've just heard from some of the black pioneers of the game, including Paul Canaville, the first black player for Chelsea, Leroy Rossignol, Gary Bennett, the first black player for Sunderland, Brendan Batson, and ex-Arsenal star Paul Davis. Now, it goes without saying that black players are more accepted everywhere these days. But do you wonder why these faces don't figure in the mix with the likes of Wenger, Houllier and Moyes? Is football history repeating itself on a more subtle level? While much work has been done to eradicate racism from the pitches and terraces of our national game, the issue of black managers has slipped under the radar of the football authorities. Tonight we ask, will players of colour ever have the complete confidence of chairman? John Barnes.
Do the people who give you the opportunity or the people who support you really believe you can do the job? And the telltale sign for me is when things don't go well, and things don't go well for a lot of people. For Alex Ferguson, it didn't go well for the first 2 years, but he kept his job. However, the support and the belief that people have in you manifests itself when things don't go well. Do they still support you?
The more black players who play for England, there's Paul Ince is had a fantastic career, unbelievable career. It just baffles me, because there's a wealth of experience and understanding football. People should be banging the door down.
England international and proven leader Sol Campbell there, who's amazed by former international colleague Paul Ince now having to ply his trade in League One, following one transient top-flight opportunity at Blackburn in 2008. Ince himself has considered if the colour of his skin has been a factor in his employment prospects. None more so than when he first attempted to move into management.
I think the hardest thing is to think that the reason why you're not getting these jobs is because you're black. It really is hard to comprehend that. And it's harder for me because I'm actually in a job and I've been in 2 or 3 jobs. I've been a manager for nearly 5 years now. So it's hard for me to say that. For me to just come out my mouth and say, well, I didn't get a job because I was black.
Yeah.
People are going to listen to that because they just think, oh, well, that's sour grapes because he didn't get the job.
Chris Hughton has become the first Premier League manager to lose his job this season. He's been sacked by Newcastle United with the club 11th.
One major cause for concern is that a lack of patience in the modern game is preventing black managers from getting their reputations established, let alone the chance to make an impact. Brendan Batson has worked for the PFA and is now an advisor to the Football Association.
Someone like Chrissy Hughton, who's been around the block in terms of his coaching ability, he did a great job at Newcastle, he lost his job. Now, if that had been Alan Shearer, who did the job of Chris Hughton, he'd have got a 10-year contract.
Chris, I was with the other night. He's a very talented coach and certainly had an incredibly successful time taking Newcastle back up into the Premier League. We have probably over 50 managers out of work and keen to get back in. The average life of a football manager in the 4 leagues is about 14, 15 months. There are only 5 or 6 managers who have been in their job for longer than 6 years. And when you're out of work for 16 or 17 months, that's the length of time it takes to find another job to come back in terms of management.
Richard Bevan of the League Managers Association. Since the first black manager, Tony Collins, reigned at Rochdale in the 1960s, the numbers employed have never hit double figures. Back in 2003, PFA Chief Executive Gordon Taylor lambasted the game's boardrooms for employing only 4 black managers. Remarkably, 8 years on, there are now only 2.
Some clubs had reputations for not recruiting black players, and that, to the people in the game, that stuck out, like a pikestaff. But that changed, and because it changed on the pitch, that gave me a belief that it could change off the pitch. And I really believe if we get more players like Chris Powell who are prepared to go for it, show that they're prepared to do their homework, not expect a top job, probably too soon. And I think, that's what we need to try and encourage.
Former British NBA basketball star, now management consultant and psychologist John Amici, has experienced coaching methods on both sides of the Atlantic. As an advisor to the PFA, he has his own views on why black management numbers are so low in football.
The fact that there are no or very few high-profile executives in football, high-profile people in football, and high-profile managers in football who are black does make black people question whether that's a viable job for them. And that keeps talented people away from positions where they could really help teams and the sport as a whole.
Academic and author Ellis Cashmore, Professor of Culture, Media and Sport at Staffordshire University, has researched and written on the issue of racism and black representation in football.
There is a natural reluctance to gamble. When you appoint a manager, you want a proven model of success. You get that kind of self-perpetuating idea going. You tend to want to appoint people who either look like, sound like, or in some way resemble successful characters. In other words, once one black manager does break through, I think it will be a domino effect.
But what is the historical context for the lack of black managers? Great players of the 70s and 80s battled against racism on the pitch, and so were certainly more than tentative about potentially putting on a big overcoat or tracksuit and testing themselves out alongside the big management characters of the era. Allison, Clough, McMenemy and Charlton, to name a few. Although some players may have been encouraged to have a go at coaching, for most, it was a step too far. Wolves legend and former Welsh international George Berry is a case in point.
Derek Parkin, who was a fullback at Wolves, he said that you should, to stay in the game, you've got what it takes to actually become a coach and a manager. I just started to laugh. I says, where am I going to get a job? There's no chance. Black players don't get managers' jobs. There's too much racism at the top end of the game. People that own the football clubs, the chairman, they're all white. There's no black people about. Why they want to take the chance? It's bad enough appointing a manager than to heap more pressure on yourself as a chairman to have a black manager on top of it all. And the fact there was no black managers at the time anyway.
The perception that the manager's role was out of reach barely seemed to change for the next generation of black players playing in the 90s. Although some progress was made on the pitch, the route into management was still far from clear-cut. Former England striker Les Ferdinand.
A lot of the guys that I see now who I played football with in the past say to me, never saw you as a coach. I always felt it was an industry that perhaps would be very difficult for me to get into, and sort of like discounting it out of my mind as where I was going to go when I finished playing. I just felt that for black players going into coaching or going into management, the pathway was still very blocked. People kept saying because of what you've done, where you've been, where you played, and how your career's gone, you'd naturally get a position as a manager. I found since I've come out of it, it's not to be like that.
The debate about black coaches has been going on for many years, ever since I was playing. Probably, you know, because if you look at my age, I'm now 47. So when I was coming towards the end of my career, or even halfway through my career, you had older black players who had finished playing and they're trying to get into coaching, trying to get into management, and they weren't. So the debate has been raging ever since as to why. And the way I look at it, I liken black managers, not so much coaches, but black managers these days, to black goalkeepers and black centre-backs in the 70s. There must have been black goalkeepers and black centre-halves. However, professionally, all of the black players were strikers or wingers. Back then, there was a stereotypical view that black players were quick, they're fast, they're strong, they don't think too much, they don't put them in so-called positions of responsibility, of which you'd say central defence, defensive midfield, goalkeepers. You didn't see many of them. Then, those myths have been dispelled. With David James in goal, Paul Ince as a captain, you know, you got black holding midfield players, black defenders. So from a playing point of view, those myths about black players only being suited to certain roles on the football field have completely been dispelled. But from a managerial point of view, the question mark is, can they actually manage? So you have some black coaches in the academies and the reserves and the youth team and under 15s, but that debate as to whether they can actually manage, which for me is absolutely ridiculous. Just like the black goalkeepers and black centre-backs in the 70s was a ridiculous argument. Unfortunately, that still is the view even now.
Former England international and Liverpool star John Barnes there. Professor Ellis Cashmore has written on the contribution of black sportsmen for the last 20 years. His latest research poll suggests over 70% of black fans still believe racism exists at the highest levels of football.
Players can express themselves on the field of play. So no matter how much racism and prejudice and sheer bigotry there is in society generally, once a player gets on the field of play, he has the same rules to abide as white players. And so, you know, the rules are the same. It's a great kind of, you know, to use a cliche, an equalizer. But of course, off the field of play, it's a different situation entirely. And you rely on the decision-making, the perceptions of other people.
Les Ferdinand is now on the coaching staff at Spurs, but has always had ambitions to manage from the time when he was contemplating retirement. But he told me that it's proven to be more difficult than he expected.
I went on this coaching course many years ago. Mark Bright was on it, Stuart Pearce and a few other well-known players. The fella did a talk at the beginning and he said, there's some of you in here will get a job on your reputations and what you've done, and there's others that will need these qualifications to be able to get a job. I always remember looking around at Bright and saying to him, don't worry, I'll give you a job when I become the manager. So he laughed and he said, yeah. And I spoke to him the other day and I said to him, oh, Bright, I've just completed the B badge and all that. And he went, 30. You remember when you turned around and said to me, you give me a job? I said, look, you've got to do the badges now. But, you know, one of the things I must admit as well, when I first came out of football, I said if I was going to go into coaching, before I did it, I wanted to get all the qualifications under my belt because I didn't want to get a job just on my name. So I embarked on it, but it's taken me a long time because I got very comfortable sitting on the sofa and watching football at the weekend and just talking about it.
Away from the professional game, non-league football has provided some management opportunities for black coaches to cut their teeth. However, numbers are still very sparse. Andy Priest, former Crystal Palace player, is now in charge of non-league Northwich Victoria, but finds himself the only black manager in the Evo Stick Premier Division. His first managerial post was at Bury back in 1999. As one of the few black managers working at the time, how aware was he of the racial significance of his first appointment?
I was comfortable with it. I didn't see what the big deal was, whether I was black
white, whatever. I didn't really think that was a big deal, but when I sat back and started to think about it, I realised that I could be someone who could, you know, open up the doors for more black managers and coaches to get into the game. There's a lot of good managers, whatever creed, whatever colour, that are out of a job at the minute, managers and coaches. But I do feel that at some clubs, I think the door's slightly closed on black managers. Well, I think the stats prove that. Keith Alexander was in charge at Lincoln, Leroy Rossini was at Torquay, and we were all in the same league. So you weren't sort of on your own, and you could speak to them, you know, about any experiences and that. And you felt that you're probably going to be groundbreakers, really. You know, like Cyril Regis, Brendan Batson, people like that were groundbreakers. You're hoping that, you know, Andy Priest, Keith Alexander, Leroy Rossini would do that. So, you know, I felt there was a big responsibility when I sat down and thought about it, and thought, you know, this could be leading and bringing more black managers and coaches into the game if I'm successful and I do well.
Despite operating successfully on a shoestring and taking Bury to the playoffs, Priest never received the job offers he might have expected, and is trying to rebuild his career in non-league football. However, Jim Rush, chairman of Northwich Victoria, is well aware that he has a first-class operator at the helm.
Andy Priest and Andy Morrison as a team should be managing in Football League, without a doubt.
Why do you think that is, that they're not?
There's lots of reasons, aren't there? It's right place, right time in football. There aren't enough opportunities maybe for black managers.
And you say it's nothing to do with his ability, why hasn't he been given another crack at managing a big club?
I'm 100% sure it's not. There's nothing further from my mind. Don't get me wrong, Spoonie, I'm pleased that he's not been given an opportunity, because, well, they've not got him, we have. But I have that relationship with him that anybody came in at a higher level, he's allowed to talk to them anyway. And he's done such a fantastic job for us. He's a very, very professional, thorough manager. I mean, you've been round here for the last couple of hours yourself, looking at how things are done, and you couldn't find me anything different to anything in the Championship where he prepares his teams.
One of the managers that influenced Andy Priest was the late Keith Alexander, who sadly died last year. Keith was the longest-serving black manager in the game, but he never made it to the upper echelons of English football, where his talent might have been fully recognised.
The minute's silence there, you may have heard some spontaneous applause from supporters around the ground, including the Macclesfield supporters who sent up a shout of Keith, Keith, Keith.
Everybody needs role models, and everybody needs to know that there is the opportunity to actually succeed. And when I was playing, the only role model we had was Keith Alexander, and he was ripping trees up in the lower divisions, and yet he was getting all this mentions in the press, and he'd done a great job and how great he was. But at the time, this is obviously pre the Premier League now, the old First Division, they used to go to the lower divisions for managers, but he always got overlooked, and we never understood how Keith Alexander never became a top flight manager. And that in itself actually worked against us, because we thought, if he can't make it, what chance have we got?
George Berry, ex-Fulham player and former manager of both Torquay and Brentford, Leroy Rossini, was another contemporary of Keith Alexander.
From Keith's point of view, he was looked at as a lower league expert. Keith was manager at Ilkeston when I was at Gloucester City in non-league, and he would always be like a firefighter. He could always work on no budget. So I think that had nothing to do with Keith's colour, in all honesty.
You've got to keep battling. You know, we know the resources are limited, and you've got to work with what you've got.
What can you do differently then? Is there any... You've got no room for manoeuvre, presumably, have you?
No room. We've just got to carry on doing what we're doing, and hopefully things will change for us. You have to come to places like this and work hard, and that's what we've done.
Keith Alexander, heard there in one of his last interviews in 2010, was always an optimist, despite often having to work hard against the odds in the lower leagues at clubs like Macclesfield. Ironically, Paul Ince had to go to Macclesfield in 2006 to get his first managerial opportunity.
I always looked up to Keith Alexander. Never really got, you know, the accolades and the chance to move forward. You know, I think most managers, if you get a team in the playoffs for 3 years or 4 years on a bounce, before you, like, they've been in a Championship and a Premiership, Keith Alexander never got that chance, and that's something that mystifies me.
Matt Alexander, Keith's son, reflects warmly on his father's career and achievements, but is aware that his father felt limited by the opportunities made available to him.
When he went to the playoff finals in the first season, I was earning more money as a car salesman. They got to a playoff final at Swansea at Cardiff, sorry, and I was earning more money selling Toyotas, you know. So he always wanted to manage at a highest level possible. He had big ambitions to manage really high, and I think at Peterborough, I think he saw that as his chance to do that. By signing some players, you know, like Mikael Smith, Boyd, McLean, they're all magnificent players. As you know, they've gone on and they've done massive things, you know, and he didn't get the chance to see that through, which I think, I won't say annoyed him, but I think he was a bit disappointed with.
While Keith Alexander will always be regarded as a trailblazer for the cause of black coaches, someone else who felt qualified to rise in the management ranks was Arsenal legend Paul Davis. He seemingly had all the credentials to become a future boss, but things didn't go to plan. In 2003, he found himself passed over for promotion at Arsenal. Paul picks up his own story.
Opportunities had come up for me to do the under-17s at Arsenal 3 times within the 7 years I'd been there, and each time I was overlooked. But the final time was, for me, the last straw, because I felt that by then I was overqualified, I was over-experienced, I had everything that I believe that you needed to be at that level coaching under-17s. But I was told to take it to tribunal, take it to courts, and I decided, rather than go down that route of taking it to court and prolonging it any further, that I would leave and try and find sort of coaching opportunities elsewhere. So I left and came to the PFA. I spoke with Gordon Taylor, explained my situation, and he was very understanding of where I was at, where I wanted to get to, and invited me into the coach educational setup within the PFA.
Leroy Rossignol only has one word to describe that situation.
Disgrace. What sort of character makes a good coach? Paul is quiet, he's articulate, gets on very well around people. There's no criteria. Like, if you said, Paul, look, this is what you've done, this is what you can do, what you're going to do, yeah, fine. Paul, you're not good at that, so that's why you're not going to get the job. Not a problem. But to say, to threat him, your character's not good enough, well, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And it comes back to my point about the culture. What the chairman's usually been has been a really successful businessman, a social man in horse racing. I know it's a stereotype, but obviously I don't want to label
just
them
like the hoods and the baseball caps.
Absolutely, it's a stereotype. but a lot of chairmen are like that. They go-getters and they want somebody who's like them. And they used to look at somebody who's black and think, oh, I don't really know. They used to put them on the back foot. Football has a culture. You have to be, certainly when I was playing, a certain way. There was a drinking culture involved. And it wasn't part of my culture. I wasn't a heavy drinker, you know. I didn't mind going out and having a dance boonie. I could do a few tricks. I could move a bit, you know what I'm saying? But that wasn't really part of my culture. And that culture was in the boardrooms as well. And everybody was in charge of the club. There was, I suppose, a social culture, which I found myself uncomfortable with.
While Paul Davis has now opted out of coaching for a club and Leroy has forged a media career, Les Ferdinand's ambitions to manage remain alive and kicking. He's now one of Harry Redknapp's trusted lieutenants at Spurs, but is only too aware of the challenge ahead in terms of being accepted in all sections of the game.
I watch our games from the director's box, and I would say 99% of the time I'm the only black person in the director's box. And I'm very aware of it because, like, I'm always looking at progress and how we are progressing, and 99% of the time. So what I'm saying to you, the directors and people like that who own football clubs, the majority of their friends are Caucasian.
It may go down to maybe chairmen and directors getting their heads round to it. A black manager can handle the team and run their assets, so to speak, properly. I don't understand why, for me, it's quite bizarre, really.
Newcastle player Sol Campbell following on from Ferdinand's thoughts there. Meanwhile, former NBA star John Amici has an unequivocal view on managerial recruitment in sports.
Well, right now, most management positions seem to work on a who-you-know basis. So it's not about your accreditation, it's not about your perceived skill, it's as much about who you know.
John Barnes' credentials as a top footballer are undisputed, but his first foray into management was a very tall order by any measure. So was it a mistake to take on the hot seat at Celtic Park in 1999?
John Barnes' fate was sealed when Inverness Cali Thistle scored their third and decisive goal on Tuesday night. But it took Celtic close to 48 hours to confirm that they had sacked the man who'd been recommended by Kenny Dalglish and who arrived only last June.
Well, my opportunity at Celtic came about solely because of Kenny Dalglish, no other reason. Celtic didn't particularly want me. In fact, they didn't want me. But Kenny insisted. And it's understandable. Celtic are a huge club, so for a first-time manager who's an ex-player going to manage Celtic, it's understandable that they're going to have these reservations, which is fine. the most important thing in terms of staying in a job is the response you get from people when you're there. The response you get from players. You can have Eric Cantona talking about trawlers and seagulls and sardines, and he's a philosopher. Whereas if Tony Adams, who's white, but a Cockney, with his Cockney accent saying that, they would have said, Tony's an idiot, what are you talking about? But because Eric is French, he's a philosopher. So we'd have all these misconceptions and preconceptions of people based on where they're from, their colour, their intelligence. And unfortunately for us, being black means that we are really starting at the bottom of the rung in terms of the attitude that people have towards us, how high they rate our intelligence.
I think what operates here is what I call the Rebecca myth. The idea being that there is a kind of mental model of success in the minds of a lot of owners. And when they think of success, they think Alex Ferguson, Jose Mourinho, Arsene Wenger, and none of these are black, remember. So when they come to appointing the next manager, they'll think to themselves, well, we want someone who either looks like, sounds like, or in some way resembles, not just one of these three, but any of the other great managers. And of course, the problem being for black managers is that they have achieved some success, but we don't have any UEFA Champions League winners or Premier League winners or not too many FA Cup winners. So they haven't really made the breakthrough at the very highest possible levels. When they do, it will end what is currently a very unpleasant situation where we have so few black managers.
Professor Ellis Cashmore there, ending part 1 of Total Blackout. In part 2, we'll be exploring some of the possible solutions to increasing the number of black managers within the game, including calls for a United States-style Rooney Rule and affirmative action on recruitment. More of that after news and sport.
Online at bbc.co.uk/5live.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
5 Live News.
Welcome back to part 2 of Total Blackout with me, Jonathan Joseph, aka Spoonie. So far, we've focused on the experience of black managers in the English game and those who feel that they've had their ambitions to manage thwarted based merely on their colour. Shortly, I'll be looking at some of the possible solutions to increasing the number of black managers. Remember, there are only 2 in the 92 Football League clubs. Paul Ince is one of the chosen 2, now gaffer at Notts County. I met up with him at Meadow Lane. Are you aware of your position as a role model? Are you aware that maybe there's people, young black players coming towards the end of their career that look and think, you know what, Paul Ince has walked that path, I want to walk that path?
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why you are going to take your knocks. You know, obviously for me as a manager, keeping Macclesfield up, then going to MK Dons and winning the double, then getting thrown into the Premiership with Blackburn, being the first black Premiership manager, didn't get the support and time that I deserved or I needed. Might have been a little bit too soon for me, but it was a great experience. And it would have been easy after Blackburn to say, no, that's not for me. It's been easy to walk away and say, well, I've tried it, I've been successful at 2 clubs, didn't work at Blackburn, so I'm going to knock it on the head now and move on. And I also felt that I had a responsibility to black players, black kids, black managers who want to get into the game.
Cast your mind back now to your time at Wolves. Fantastic playing career, one of the only few people ever to play for Manchester United and Liverpool. First black player to captain his country. You're now playing for Wolves. It was widely regarded in and outside the game that you would be the next manager of the club. You were overlooked.
I've been at the club for 4 years. I knew the club. I had a great relationship with the fans, and obviously it was a shock to me when Glenn Hoddle decided that he wasn't gonna stay. You know, because obviously he's a fantastic manager, great manager. It was strange because I went upstairs to the stadium to have my interview with Jack Hayward, and it was the first interview I've ever done.
This period of time, you very much would have been like a fish out of water because other than the time at West Ham when you were coming through, everything had just been top, top, top. Manchester United, Italy, Liverpool. Now you're playing in the second highest division and you've got to do a job interview.
Yeah, I didn't know what to expect from a job interview because I've never done one before, obviously. So obviously to go upstairs, Sir Jack's got his own little flat above the ground. We went up there and we spoke about the game and, you know, how would you change it, what would you do? So it wasn't really anything that kind of surprised me because all you do, you talk about football, and I've been in the game long enough to know enough. And obviously I was in there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. But when you come out there, you just think, how did I do? You start questioning yourself, did I do okay? Is it enough? A fans poll About a week later, 75% wanted me to be the next manager. So I'm thinking, well, the players want me to be the manager, the fans want me to be the manager. I better start seriously thinking about this.
And at that point, you hadn't really thought about it?
No, because I never presumed that Glenn Hodder would be leaving.
Right.
You know, so I knew I wanted to go into management, but you know, I still felt I could play another year or so. But then, the more frenzy whipped up about me being a manager, the more I got used to liking the idea of running a football club. So obviously, when Mick McCarthy got the job, I was disappointed, of course, because you know I presumed that I was going to get the job. Saying that, Mick McCarthy's come in and he's done a fantastic job, and you know took him into the Premiership. But I think at the time, you know, there was a tinge of disappointment, you know, because I just felt it was right for me. You know, it was the right club to manage. You know,
felt like home. You knew the place.
Yeah, if it was stabilised, I knew everyone about it. I wasn't going to a club where they were second from bottom or bottom of the table or fighting for their lives. Or it was a chance to build a team. Was there ever a point where you thought privately, I've most probably not been given this job because I'm black? I'd hate to think that's the case. I really, really would. But I feel that everything was pointing in my direction. You know, everything was there, everything was favourable, the fans want me there. Are you trying to be as diplomatic as you can be? No, not to, because I think, you know, in the 21st century, you know, it's probably before that now, you know, that's not going to be the case. You know, I like to think society's changed since then. You know, it did make me wonder, because I just felt, well, what more can I do? And then when you think, well, why didn't I get this job? You know, your mind starts to play tricks with you. Is it because of your colour? And you keep saying, no, it can't be that, surely, you know, surely those times are gone. And then you keep thinking, well, why didn't I not get the job then? You know, you never really come to the answer. I could never come out and say, well, the reason I didn't get this job was because I'm black.
The more the doors open, the more the youth can see. A fair chance means a greater opportunity to have a brighter future.
Ince speaking frankly there. Paul is one of the few top black players to have found a footing in management since his early experiences of being passed over. However, Incey is an all too rare exception to the rule. So just how is the game going to address the blatant imbalance between those who play the game and those who currently manage? Here's more from Les Ferdinand.
About 2-3 years ago, I was called into the FA and they said to me, Les, is there a problem with black players taking their coaching badges? And I said, well, look, by the mere fact that you've asked me that question, you know there's a problem. And I said, black players are coming out of football and going away from football because they don't believe there's an opportunity for them to go in and be part of this industry. So there's no point in going on a coaching badge for 5 years knowing there's going to be no prospect or no job at the end of it. I mean, I know there's a lot of players out there, and it's in famous cases, you know, Paul Davies had all the credentials but was overlooked. We need to change that mentality, not only of the FA, not only of the board members, but also with the managers.
One possible factor that may be holding back the latest generation of former black players could be a reluctance to start at the bottom. Many top players have no financial necessity to stay in the game after retirement, and learning the managerial ropes in the lower divisions can be a precarious prospect and a real reputation breaker. Leroy Rossignol.
I really do believe that we need to get to those players who are coming out of the game, find out who wants to do it, get them together with the people who are already in the game and say, look, this is the way, if you want to move forward, you've got to coach first and you've got to take the horrible jobs, or, you know, don't expect to come out of the game, play for Chelsea and go and manage Chelsea. A lot of people scoffed at Paul when he took the Macclesfield job. I was really proud of him, really proud of him, because...
It's funny because of all the characters and all the kind of, and I say baggage using the term quite loosely, that might come with the personality and the character that is Paul Ince.
Yeah.
It was definitely a fly in the eye of everybody when he took the job at Macclesfield because, well, if I'm such a big-time Charlie, then why am I not sitting there waiting for the Premier League to come knocking?
That says a lot about Paul. Yeah, but one thing Paul is, he knows what he is and he'll go and he loves football. And that just showed how much he loved football, because Macclesfield, I think they got even less crowds than Torquay, 2,300.
And they were adrift when he took over as well.
Exactly. And when I used to go down there and with likes of Keith Alexander, we used to laugh about how much money we didn't have, but we were in the job.
So what was the reality for Paul Ince at the beginning of his management journey?
I think it's always hard when you look at where I started, because I started from the lower echelons. You know, Macclesfield, no disrespect, but they were a fantastic club. I had a great time there. It was a shame, really, because I just felt all of what I've achieved as a footballer. Some players haven't achieved that, and yet they're going to jobs where they're given money and in the higher leagues.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think, you know, look at Southgate winning to Middlesbrough, Roy Keane goes into Sunderland.
Shearer.
Yeah, Shearer. I've had to go into Macclesfield, who are 92nd in the league, 10 points away from safety. I think if that's the way I have to go and prove that I can manage in football, then I was prepared to get my hands dirty. And
I mean, these were all guys that represented their countries as well, I suppose. Why was Paul Ince then having to take a job at Macclesfield when people were getting jobs in the Premier League as their first job?
I took a risk, to be honest, because I think if Macclesfield had gone down that year, you know, then people would have perceived me as not being capable of managing in the Football League. The fact that I managed to keep Macclesfield up the last game of the season, funny enough against Notts County, funny enough, kind of put my name on the map as a manager, that I could actually manage a football team in a crisis and keep them up.
Come on, everything is all right.
Another England star of recent years is Newcastle's Sol Campbell, who is now considering doing his coaching badges ahead of retirement. But Sol, like many other black players, has concerns about the additional pressures that come with the management territory.
It's totally different from being a player. You've got to really knuckle down and you've got to deal with a lot of players' attitudes, and then you've got to do the club side, the director side, the chairman side. You kind of have to look after everybody, the fans as well, but then you've got to look after yourself and make sure you're ready and you can do your job as well. So, and sometimes being a footballer and going straight into management, personally, I would like to have a little break in between to allow your body, your mind to recover, and then be fresh and ready to go into management, because, you know, you got to be careful, because if it doesn't work, you might not be in a job.
John Barnes has certainly tasted the tough end of management, to which Sol refers, but he's also frustrated about a lack of current openings to get back into the game. And he's not alone.
I want to be a manager. There have been lots of black players who have wanted to be managers, who've had the ability to be managers, regardless of whether they're icons or not. Because if you look at a lot of the great managers now, Jose Mourinho was never a footballing icon, neither was Sir Alex Ferguson, but they were given opportunities to manage. So I'm not a believer that because you're a great player, you should be a great manager, or you should be given an opportunity as a manager because you're an icon or a great player. However, it's completely disproportionate, the amount of ex-black players who want to be managers, who either were given one opportunity and not another opportunity, or not given long enough. But the point is, regardless of whether they had wanted to or not, I think that the opportunity really was not there for them.
Northwich manager Andy Preece is another frustrated voice in the football wilderness. Preece once looked destined for big things, but he now sees the route back into full-time management as a fading dream, aged only 44.
I think you probably could get, you know, a League One job. You might be lucky and get a Championship job, but I just don't see that happening. You know, you just got to keep trying, keep believing. I would hope that things will change. It's still a generation thing. My fear is that it might be another 20 years before we see a real change and see more black managers in the game. You know, I hope I'm wrong.
But will players of Sol Campbell's stature be willing to wait to see significant changes in the management landscape?
15 years, you're having a laugh. That's far too long. I think it's got to happen now, really. There's guys out there ready to go. 15 years, it's just like it's all about now, really.
Express yourself.
I'm Spoonie, and we're discussing the lack of black managers and coaches in the English game on BBC Radio 5 Live. So we've heard about some of the experiences, expectations and frustrations of black managers so far in the programme. But what about the solutions to the problem? Richard Bevan, CEO of the League Managers Association, believes improvements in the number of black players taking coaching qualifications and the building of the National Football Centre at Burton will be a significant step forward in years to come.
In football management, you've probably got three key aspects. You've got leadership, you've got management, and you've got coaching. And obviously the FA run all of the coaching licensing courses, and from our perspective, we're going to focus on leadership and management. And that will take place mainly focused at the National Football Centre, but we will be linking up with 3 or 4 world-renowned business schools and looking at courses that we can really help develop a managerial career pathway. I think if you went to Italy, if you went to Holland, you went to a number of the key football countries in Europe, you would find that there is a much clearer pathway which will lead to more opportunities than we've created here in this country.
Ex-gunner Paul Davis, who now works for the Professional Footballers Association as a coach educator, agrees with Bevan's viewpoint.
What I would like to try and do with players is encourage them to be positive, because you need to stay positive with all the negativity that you see, and also to get qualified to be the best coach you can, so that if opportunities come that you are better prepared. We can't guarantee anybody positions, but we can try and support all players. But part of my role is particularly looking at black members who are looking to stay in the game within coaching and say, look, we understand there's issues here, but we want to try and support you and see if we can take the situation further on than where it is now.
While qualifications may be one route forward, cultural commentator and author Ellis Cashmore states that the issue of black management has been ignored for too long by the Football Association and that more rigorous initiatives are now required.
I think the FA needs to think of a policy and recognise that this is an embarrassment. We have 92 clubs and we have, 2 black managers at any one time, and yet the embarrassment is occasioned by the fact that if you look at the playing staff, it's something like 20 to 25% at any one moment. And that has to be wrong.
In 2010, Hugh Robertson, the Minister of Sport and the Olympics, declared his concern with our national game, stating a lack of governance in the sport as being a major problem. A parliamentary select committee is currently investigating the running of football, and the issue of equal opportunities is very much on the agenda.
When I said that football was the worst governed sport in this country, I was looking across the piece. If you look at the board of the FA, it is entirely composed of white, late middle-aged men, all of whom are conflicted to some extent or another. They either represent the professional game or the national game. What we need to do is to have the FA as the sport's national governing body. It needs to resume its position as the governing body of sport. But before it does that, it has to be much more representative of this country as a whole. And at the moment, it simply isn't.
But while it's perhaps easy to point the finger at the FA for the poor representation of black people in the non-playing side of the game, the FA don't actually appoint club managers. That's the domain of the boardroom. Leroy Rossignol.
The FA can only do so much, and as I said, the criteria...
Are they doing anything? Are they doing enough?
They're not doing enough. No, they never. No one ever does enough, from my point of view. But getting the job at a football club isn't like getting a job as an accountant. It isn't like getting a job in the media. The best people get the job there. It's usually down to whether the chairman likes you or not, and whether he can get on with you. I've been in interviews, and I've had directors ask me questions about what would you do on a Tuesday in training, and I think, well, you don't know. I could tell you absolutely anything, because they don't know. It's about first impressions. There's no real criteria for appointing a manager at a football club. Everybody does it differently.
But could the Players' Union, another key stakeholder in the game, have done more to influence clubs and football leaders? Gordon Taylor of the PFA.
If you could tell me how we could be stronger, I'd be interested, because I'm always open to debate on how we can improve things. All I can think of is that if things don't start to improve, we'll look at a rule that demands that clubs have to at least have a good selection and include former black players who are fully qualified as coaches. Our job is to try and get them in the first place fully qualified, then there's no excuse not to interview them, and then to get them involved with the interview process. And perhaps we need to be stronger with the FA and the Premier League and Football League. But the Football League's only just agreed that all the managers they appoint should be properly qualified. Premier League already have that in place.
Has the time come for English football and perhaps other European leagues to look to America for the blueprint for change? John Amici spent many years as a top professional basketball player in the States and explains how affirmative action and a more militant attitude from black sportsmen has now changed the coaching scene.
The reason that America is markedly different is because in football, the Rooney Rule, which has meant that viable black candidates have been seen at the very last stages and their merits have become more obvious, and also because of the professional players' leagues and unions are far more active, in fact, far more activist, and make sure that they see coaches who are like them represented. The reason that hasn't come to Britain, in terms of the union, I think is because the union is not powerful enough. But then there's also the fact that why would you want to adopt a rule? If you're the stale, male and pale coaching staff of a club, why would you want to see a rule implemented that would mean your eventual departure? That's a tough thing to do, but I'll tell you what, if you're really interested as a club in being the very best, then you bring in the best, and you don't care whether they come from the Ivory Coast or from Belarus, you bring in the best.
The problem for football's governing body and for black players is just how to implement and enforce an equal opportunity style policy within the English framework. Step up Cyrus Mayri, the civil rights lawyer who who masterminded the controversial Rooney Rule to counter discrimination against black coaches in American football.
With the late Johnny Cochran, my friend and superstar lawyer, we put out a report called Black Coaches in the National Football League, Superior Performance, Inferior Opportunities. And the solution we came out with was something that I developed in one of my cases, which is before you hire a senior manager at your company, you have to identify and interview a diverse slate of candidates. And then you will let the best rise to the top. So I went into the NFL with Johnny Cochran and we said, we want you to adopt this idea for the National Football League. And this was in the fall of 2002. When we started on this report, there was only one black head coach in the National Football League. When we presented this idea, one of the owners stood up and said, we have to do something about this. And that was Dan Rooney, the owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers. And he called an owners committee together on diversity issues. And the way they framed it was to interview at least one minority candidate every time there's an open position in the National Football League. Instantaneously, the rule ran into trouble because it was a handshake, not an enforceable rule. So what happened on implementation? First, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, he said, okay, I can live up to this. I will interview the white candidate in person for 2 days, and I'll call the black candidate on the telephone for 20 minutes. And we said that's not acceptable. So that led to the NFL putting together written guidelines. You interview people face-to-face. Then the second thing that happened was that one of the teams made a decision that they were going to hire a white candidate for their head coach. And this is the Detroit Lions. And they had a fine coach that they picked as a white candidate. And then they told the black candidates, even though we're going with this other coach, come on into our facilities and we'll show you around and talk to you. And the black candidates said, well, why should we do that? And at that point, we told the National Football League, you either enforce this rule and fine the general manager of the Detroit Lions, or no one's going to follow this. And the National Football League sided with us and fined the general manager of the Detroit Lions, Matt Millen, $200,000. And to make it even their word heard loudly, they said the next violator of this will be $500,000. And guess what? There's not been a violation since then.
But should and could a Rooney Rule work in English football, particularly in tandem with initiatives such as fast-tracking and mentoring schemes? Gordon Taylor believes it could be a viable solution.
I'd be happy to call for it now if my black players and coaches on the forum that we have, if they felt the time was right, I would lead it for them.
Former Brighton player Chris Ramsey, one of the most qualified coaches in English football, currently working with the academy players at Spurs, feels that the Rooney Rule is worth considering if we can adhere to an American system of values.
If they could do that and put a situation where you felt that you were on a level playing field whenever you went for an interview or a job, you know, that would be a huge move forward. I mean, I don't come from an academic background, but I force myself to be in that situation so that when you do sit down with people, you know, they can't turn you away for actually not being qualified. I've got my pro license now, so I've tried my best to cover all angles so that when I'm sitting there, they can actually take me on what I know and what I do and hopefully put everything else aside.
But some former players are sceptical of the idea. Paul Canaville, the first black player for Chelsea in 1982, and Les Ferdinand are of a similar opinion.
I just can't see that working here at Championship Leagues or any individual given the opportunity who comes up for the job. You look at his credentials and you either say you give it to him or you don't, or you give him a chance.
Board of directors have already identified the manager they want. And although they put their applications in the paper and saying, yeah, let's interview, we have to advertise this job, they know who they want. And they're going to go after that person.
You don't know if you have the best players to put on your team unless you cast a wide net and look at all the different players. Well, you don't know if you have the best manager or head coach unless you cast a wide net. And that's all we're asking people to do. We're not saying who to hire. We're not saying how many people to hire. We're saying hire the best. And the way you know you hired the best, if you interview a diverse slate of candidates.
We do need people to step forward, but we also need employers to say, we're going to give them an interview. Why the first stage is let them have an interview.
Brendan Batson. But what other pressure beyond calls for the Rooney Rule is currently being applied in the game? Former Chelsea star Paul Elliott was at the Leading the Way conference last week, looking at the whole issue of lack of opportunities for black people and minorities in football. I caught up with him.
I'd like to feel that there's a more of an open, transparent process, because you find there's many managers that, I call it that merry-go-round about. They fall off, and then 6 months later, they get another job. So I think we've got to try and open the minds of people, particularly within the structures of the football club. And there's some models of good practice, but there's not enough.
Whatever the future holds for football, the time has surely come to address the issue of underrepresentation in management. Immediately after this programme, the debate will continue. What are the workable solutions? Fast-tracking, mentoring, positive discrimination, a Rooney Rule, or do black entrepreneurs and former players now need to start buying clubs to create opportunities? But before we discuss all of that, here are some final thoughts from some of our key contributors.
You sometimes get to an age where you miss the boat. I look to the generation of players that we've got now and think these players now need to be making sure they get qualified, because they're the ones that are going to take it forward.
For me, it's important to keep that going. You know, your likes of Andy Cole, who wants to get back into coaching management. Les Ferdinand, who's doing a bit at Tottenham. Rio Ferdinand, Sol Campbell. You know, there's enough black players out there.
It's breaking that cycle. If you get one black successful manager, that will be a knock-on effect for the rest of black people to actually apply for coaching jobs or even apply for managers' jobs.
How can I say we've banged the drum enough when they're just not properly represented? So we've got to bang it even harder. We've got to keep banging it until, you know, they're deafened with it.
I think now you just got to say, forget colour and just look at what the man can do.
One thing that the history of racism teaches us, and we've had racism around for 400 or 500 years now, remember, is that when given the opportunity, black people prove themselves time and time again as capable, as good as the next man, and that's what would happen.
Total Blackout was an Input Media North production for BBC Radio 5 Live, produced by Karen Gabay.
There are an awful lot of issues to come out of that Total Blackout documentary with Spoonie, and we will discuss them over the next hour and a half here on 5 Live Sport. I want you to get in touch as well. The text is 85058 and the lines are open now as well. We will take your calls, 0500 909 693. Spoonie is alongside me, alongside a host of other guests, and I will introduce you to them after Kate Williams with the BBC News.
Online at bbc.co.uk/5live.
This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Colonel, good afternoon.
Good evening, I'm Mark Chapman and this is 5 Live Sport. Between now and Adil Ray at 10:30, we're going to pick up on all the points made in the Total Blackout documentary that you've just heard. In the studio with me, Jonathan Joseph.
Good evening.
And Paul Elliott, ex-Chelsea, ex-Celtic, and from Kick It Out.
Good evening.
Rodney Hines, who's sports editor of The Voice. Evening, Rodney.
Good evening, Mark.
And Brendan Batson, who's an FA consultant for the Equality Department, is in Birmingham and hopefully not feeling too lonely in the studio on his own there. Evening, Brendan.
Good evening, all. Yeah.
We will try not to forget that you're there during this document.
I'll remind you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. First of all, let me start with you, Spoonie. Did you have any preconceptions going into making this documentary? And if you did anything surprise you at the end of it?
One of the things that I thought is that off the bat there aren't enough black managers and coaches in the country, and then it was like, well, is this stopping the flow of other managers coming in? So it was twofold. One, are people being blocked? And two, are people not going for the job because they don't see it as a viable career option? And those were the main two thoughts that I went to it. And one of those, I suppose, are going to be down to the institution and the governing bodies, and the other argument is very much going to be down to the black managers collectively.
85058 is the text this evening. 0500 909 693 is our phone number. The lines are open. Paul, when you started out as a player, you had role models. Yes?
Yes.
Do you think there's a lack of role models now for the black players of your era becoming managers?
Absolutely. I mean, if you look statistically, currently in the game, probably close to 23-24% black players at all levels of the game. Yet there's only 2 black managers. One, obviously, Paul Ince and Chrissy Powell. And the irony with both of them, I mean, Paul Ince has an outstanding footballing career. And he's learnt management the hard way. He's actually got his hands dirty. And he had a great opportunity at Blackburn. And in my view, you know, it never worked out. I mean, at that level, it becomes subjective. Could have had a bit more time, but then when you're a chairman, you know, Paul Ince was there on Paul Ince's merit, not because he was black. That was just a byproduct, but he was obviously an outstanding role model, didn't get the right results. Paul Ince, unfortunately, was out of the job. But Paul got back into the system very, very quickly. And I think you look at him, look at Chrissy Powell, done the, you know, particularly Chrissy Powell, fully qualified, done the coaching badges, come through, got a great job at Charlton. But I think it's about the people as well that employs them. At Charlton, you've got an outstanding man called Peter Varney, who's a very decent man, an honourable man, and he's looking at Chrissy Powell and saying, you can do the job. I'm not even contemplating on your colours. It's about you, the man. You got the qualifications. I think you are the best person to do the job.
See, Brendan, why did those 70s footballers not go on to be managers? Those trailblazers in the 70s, why did they not become managerial trailblazers in the 90s?
Well, certainly there were no black managers or prominent black managers at that time, and I think there's a perception that coaching and management wasn't for them. I remember speaking to one player who I won't name, but one black player who's coming to the end of his career. I spoke to him and I said, you know what, you're very well known, particularly in your location. Are you thinking about, you know, coaching and management? And I always remember what he said to me. He said, that's not for us, Bren, meaning the black players in general. So I think there is a mindset, but also we can't get away from the fact, and you look at the numbers now, numbers don't lie. We've only got 2. Now, if you cast your mind back to the late 90s, we also had Ruud Gullit and also John Tigana. I mean, John Tigana did a great job at Fulham, and I don't know whether they got the jobs because they were actually foreign managers and happened to be in the right place at the right time. So I do think there's been a lack of role models, and also there is this perception that, you know, there seems to be a lack of appetite and enthusiasm from clubs to appoint black managers.
Brendan, I was just going to say that the facts, another statistic to throw into that, in 2003, there were actually less black players playing. There's about 20% playing, and there were 4 managers. And now there's 25% playing and only 2. So in real terms, it's gone backwards.
Hold that stat. I've just got to go back to Roddy at Motherwell. There's been another goal in the Scottish Cup.
Yes, and a first for a certain well-known player. Motherwell 3, Dundee United 0. That pretty well, I'm sure, puts Dundee United, the holders, out of the tournament. Franny Jeffers getting his first of this competition. He turned 30 yards out from goal, swivelled and drove low and hard into the far corner of the net. It's now Motherwell 3, Dundee United 0, so I fancy they're out. Can I just add one thing to your conversation, if you don't mind me saying, because I heard myself featured in the documentary, Spoonie's documentary, talking about John Barnes. I've often thought and said when this has come up that a tremendous opportunity was lost in a way by what happened at Celtic with John Barnes. You heard John saying that Celtic didn't want him. It was Kenny Dalglish's recommendation. Now that's true, but it wasn't for any reason of race. It was the fact that John Barnes was an untried manager. It wasn't to do with the fact that he was a black manager or a black coach, but it was the fact he had no experience of this club and no experience of Scotland, really, in that respect. And so from that point of view, it was a great disappointment that a more experienced manager who could have done the job, I think, in different circumstances, was not appointed. And a great shame, I think, also for John, because it was a big club not to have managed well.
OK, Rodney, thank you very much. I'll come back to the experience thing in just a second. We haven't heard from Rodney yet. In that documentary that we heard, Rodney, probably the most outspoken person in it was Ellis Cashmore. He went further to say he thought there was racism. The former black players or the current black players or the black managers didn't go that far. Why?
Because I would say that the current black players probably have a little bit to lose if they were to speak out now. There's obviously got to be an issue. I think John said at the top of the documentary, it's about belief. And when these candidates sit in front of the chief executives or chairmen of boards, there isn't that belief. Because...
But there isn't that belief.
There isn't the belief that they
from the candidates or from the board?
From the board, that they can do the job. Because do not underestimate the damage, and I use the word damage wisely, I'd like to think, that Paul Ince getting a knockback, or John Barnes getting knocked back in management. Yes, it's down to results at the end of the day. We've heard about the Celtic scenario. We heard about Paul Ince's results at Blackburn. But you talked about role models. And what that does is, well, if John Barnes and Paul Ince can't make it, it knocks everything back a touch, to say the very least. And then, you know, and if one of them was to make it, you'd see it go the other way in terms of access to those type of jobs, belief that a manager can do it.
But when
can I just say so?
Yeah.
The question being, why didn't the black players actually come out and say football's racist, and why did Ellis Cashmore say it? Is because, quite simply,
they were involved in football.
If a black player was to say it, or an ex-player to say it, the chances of them getting a job in the industry that they've just said is institutionally racist is very unlikely, and they know that. Yeah. It would just be like if me or you were out of work on radio and we turned and said we didn't get it because X. The chances of us getting another radio gig are highly unlikely. And it's much easier for Ellis to turn around and say, well, what can you say to me? You can't say I've got a chip on my shoulder. You can't say, you know, I'm doing it just because I'm black. Well, because he wouldn't, because you couldn't say it. But you get my point. So it's easier for someone like Ellis Cashmore to say that.
The other thing is, we have no proof. There is no proof. Unless somebody comes out from a boardroom and says, yeah, we refuse to take on a black coach and manager, we have no proof. And don't forget, black players come from a background of having to prove themselves against all the odds. When you start off in the late 60s and 70s, it was just our talent, which was visible, that allowed us to thrive. Now, at the moment, we don't, in terms of coaching and management, you have to rely on somebody else to give you the opportunity to maybe show that you have the talent to manage and to coach.
And that's the issue, isn't it? It's about equality of that opportunity that we're talking about right now.
Once you're reliant on a chairman or an owner coming out and saying and making it as clear as you're not getting the job because you're black, you're being a little bit naive, because in reality, you're just going to make sort of, you know, racism is just going to go covert then. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Paul, when Rodney talks about results going against Paul Ince or results going against John Barnes and that setting it back, is that from other black managers applying for jobs, or is that from owners going, well, that black manager failed and that black manager failed?
Well, it gives them an excuse. I mean, let me reverse the trend and look at Chris Hughton. I mean, Chris Hughton done an outstanding job. I mean, you know, the way the jobs were going at Newcastle, it was only him or the groundsman didn't get the job. And what he'd done there was outstanding. The manner in which he took them up and then stabilised the club in the Premiership. Yet, as far as I was concerned, as a footballing man looking directly at that, I'm still perplexed why he got sacked.
But that isn't a race thing, though,
correct,
is it?
No. And I think if he got... Well, I don't think it's a race thing, personally, because at the end of the day... But you're looking at the... Why was it the fact that... I mean, he should still be in a job. Yeah. And he's an outstanding role model.
But at the same time, when Chris Hughton was sacked, there was a lot of confusion about why then Roberto Di Matteo was sacked and why Sam Allardyce was sacked at the same.
But what you didn't
all happened. But
there wasn't belief. But the thing what I admired though, there wasn't belief in Chris. But once he actually got the job and showed that, he had belief. He had belief in the players, the supporters, and the media, and one of the very, very few to have done that. So I think what we're looking at the wider picture here is, I think a lot of the current players, I don't think they want to go into management because I think financially they don't want the aggravation, they don't need it. I think that's one of the major reasons as well. But I think you've got to look sort of below that and say, well, what also that one wants is the opportunity, equality of opportunity, as Rodney said, and I think that comes with also transparency in the recruitment processes as well, because there's still a kind of certain managers that come in, you know, they're always going to get a job.
I mean, I can't remember who said it in the documentary, Spoonie, but did you not think it was slightly disingenuous, if ever it was, to say if Alan Shearer had done what Chris Hughton had done, he'd have got a 10-year contract?
That was me.
That's Brendan.
Well, Brendan, there you go then. Perfect. Brendan, isn't that disingenuous?
No.
Why?
Well, why do you say is disingenuous?
Well, because Alan Shearer had been sacked at the end of the previous season, and Alan Shearer had only got 8 games to keep them up. Alan Shearer had the players on side apparently, and yet he was dismissed as well.
Yes, but I'm making a point that if Alan Shearer had achieved the results that Chris Hughton had done,
he would have been.
He wouldn't have been given that job on a permanent. Well, yeah, Chris had it on a permanent basis, but he'd have been dragged into the chairman's office saying, "Please sign this extended contract." I have no doubt about that. But that was really a response to saying, why did Chris get the sack? based on his results, and we all know it's a results business. I'm not bringing colour or race into this. I'm just talking about Chrissy Hooton as a manager who'd been successful in a very difficult situation at a very big club, who'd been trying to appoint managers, and obviously Alan Shearer, fantastic player, local hero. He couldn't do it. Chrissy Hooton did it, and yet he was turfed out on his ear when the results were still good.
So on that similar subject then, Brendan, what did you make of Paul Ince's comments in there about not getting the Wolves job?
Well, again, it's interesting what Roddy was talking about with John Barnes, saying about maybe the job was too big and they appointed an inexperienced manager. Paul Ince was untried as a manager at a club of the status of Wolverhampton Wanderers. And I think that is just, at least he had an interview, and the owners thought, for whatever his reasons, that Paul wasn't suited for that job.
But then let's be fair, Brendan. Alan Shearer was also tried and tested. Roy Keane, he got a massive job at Sunderland. Gareth Southgate got a massive job at Middlesbrough. Yeah. But the point that I'm making is using that it's a big job and they're inexperienced isn't really a reason. It's more of an excuse if you don't want to give someone an opportunity.
Well, I do think that it is not an exact science, certainly the way appointments are made. You've got players who are going into jobs, and we've got lots of examples of great players failing miserably taking jobs. But it is not an exact science, and also clubs will take a chance because Alan Shearer, you can see the fit there with Newcastle, local hero. All the fans are saying they want him. Look at Kenny Dalglish. All right, he's a tried and tested manager, but in difficult times, where do the fans go back to? Somebody that they love.
But Brendan's point is valid. In fact, the people that make those decisions would have to, somewhere along the line, take this chance or gamble, as they did with black players in the 60s and the 70s.
But I think Paul Ince, I think part of Paul Ince's point was that he'd been captain of Wolves for 4 years. He'd had an illustrious footballing career here and internationally, and for his national side. And
it was
there was a poll of 72% of the Wolves fans wanted Paul Ince to be their next manager. So actually, if the chairman felt he was under pressure, the fact that all the fans wanted Paul Ince to be the manager negates that pressure.
In that Paul Ince situation, if there had been a previous black manager, foreign or British, who had been highly successful or midway successful, Paul might have got that job. But there was nothing to point to in terms of that role model that we talked about.
And that's if we're saying that Paul Ince didn't get the job only because he was black. Otherwise, it kind of blows every argument out the water.
And I think that is one of the key areas here, is to have what I call that level of visibility, successful visibility. And I think that will empower, that will give people the confidence. And also, I think the owners of football clubs, because I think it's very important that they see that, and I think they're going to have more confidence and more belief in making those type of appointments.
But that will still need an appointment to be made, though.
Yeah, it's everything else. You need the first, don't you? Because it's the norm now. When I started my career in the late 70s, 80s with Bren, we were amongst the minority. Now it's the norm now, isn't it? So we want that norm to convert itself into the managerial sector as well.
Do you think the type of managers that are appointed, Rich the Wolf in Wandsworth, by the way, says Paul Ince was great for Wolves, but he wasn't overlooked. He simply didn't have the experience that Mick McCarthy had, and look at how the two have done since. But do you think managers and managers...
Mark, coming back to that point, how do you get the experience unless you're given the opportunity?
Well, then he went and got the experience at Macclesfield, didn't he?
Paul Ince did it almost perfectly, didn't he?
I agree with that.
He did what he needed to do at Macclesfield. He went to MK Dons. Some people said he should have stayed, and he would have been taking them up to the Championship or the Premier League, hopefully. But no one can blame him for taking that job.
Absolutely
because, how often do those type of jobs come along? But he did it almost perfectly, apart from the fact that when the results were looked at during a period at Blackburn, they weren't quite what the management needed and required. And you can understand
and also,
that.
When you've got a chairman and there's a potential, the results aren't right, I can't remember the statistics, there's a potential falling out the top flight is worth £45-50 million to their club. So they've got to think in the best interests or the wider interests.
I think Paul, to just go on Paul Ince, I was very pleased when Paul took that job. It's an opportunity for him to learn management without the spotlight at Macclesfield, his very first one. He took a job, very difficult situation, but the spotlight wasn't shining excessively brightly on him. Now, he learns his trade, he keeps him up, he gets another opportunity. He gets another opportunity at a big club, the results go against him, that is management, and the chairman or the board of directors don't support him, maybe when, they could have maybe given him a bit longer, but, he goes away. Now he's now in another job. Paul has had 4 managerial jobs now, and it looks as though he is on that managerial treadmill, and I hope he'll have a very long and hopefully create a successful career. But I think he started off doing it in the right way at an opportunity that he felt he could learn management.
Let's bring another guest in who a lot of people in this studio will know. It's Lord Ousley, chair of Kick It Out. Good evening.
Good evening, Mark.
Good evening. Overall picture, at the moment, as we sit here in 2011, how big a problem is racism in football?
Racism in British society is a big problem. Things have got better over the last 20, 30 years with a lot of hard work, but the main basis for success is organisation. We got success in tackling the problems of racial abuse and racial violence at football by organisation and leadership. The leadership essentially came from within the players themselves, although initially players, as indeed now, were very reluctant to say race is a problem. They were getting a lot of things thrown at them, abuse, fruit, anything you can name coming at them, and they were very resilient. Many that I spoke to wanted to get them into a campaign long before Kick It Out came into being, said, yeah, there's a problem, but we've got to keep our head down. We got a career ahead of us, and if we start rocking the boat, we're out. And so I think today we've still got some of that timidity. People keep their heads down. They want to keep doing what they do and hope they get noticed. And the problem of racism is the institutionalized way it exists. As some people have already said tonight, to prove discrimination, you've got to have evidence. We haven't got the situation, the legal framework that they have in the United States to push down the affirmative action route. And I don't think the Select Committee have got a chance of telling the football authorities this is the route you must go down. They could suggest it, but by example, you look at the senior politicians, when they appoint their political advisors, they don't go through a formal process. You look at all the football managers in this country, the football chairman of their clubs, they don't go through any process. But even you look at the way in which the racism manifests itself. Look at all the African teams. Look at Ghana last night. Who's their top coach? A white guy. So we've got a problem. You look at the best black players in Europe, in places like Holland. How many of them, apart from Ruud Gullit and one or two others, have come through? There's a real problem that we have to organise people in the way that Gordon Taylor showed how you could work with black professionals and organise them. And Brendan will know that well because he was there working alongside Gordon as the campaign built up and as black players got better organised. And we've got to get a mass of black footballers training to become qualified coaches and build that mass and start to organise to take on the authorities. No one else is going to do it.
So would you categorise the racism as regards appointing black managers when we talk about institutionalised racism? Is it subtle then, whereas the racism in the 70s and the 80s with the chants and the bananas and that kind of thing, where it was overt and very much in the public domain, is the racism when it comes to appointing black managers, is that subtle?
Of course it's subtle. It's ingrained as part of the culture. The whole process. Even if you say quite rightly, and the guys have said, look, we want an opportunity, and that is quite right. But if you open it up and say, right, people can apply, we'll advertise, we'll interview them, as in the example of Paul Ince and the Wolves opportunity, he had an interview. He was given the reason why he didn't get the job. But who can say the subliminal racism within the minds of those interviewing, whether it was Hayward, the chairman, or others involved? And that's what happens. The whole structure of football, British football, and English football in particular, is built on the premise of power. And those people who got power don't give it away. That's why it is white and male, predominantly. But the Football Association could always turn around and say, hey, we got two-class people in our coaching enterprise. We've got Noel Blake, we've got Hope Powell. And that's what I mean about organising. We've got to get black coaches who are talented and who are successful, however few, to be part of leading the building the base, the mass, critical mass, and also to getting them organised and to be a bit more political, less timid about taking on the institutions. Because if you look at the history of racism, how it's defeated, you've got to be organised, you've got to take it on. I didn't get to where I got to by just sitting around and keeping my head down. Yes, you've got to play the game and be part of the culture and say yes, please, and thank you very much, and nod and smile, even though you're getting shit all over you. I know, excuse me for using that word on your ear, but the reality is, if we're going to change anything, for women, for black people, on the grounds of sexuality, people with disability. You've got to fight for it, and those people have got to be in the forefront of the fight. And there are very talented black coaches in this country who could be leading that fight to change institutional culture and practice.
I have to apologise for you using that word as well, such as the regulations of the BBC, so apologies if that offended you. Do you not think, when you talk about that Paul interview with Wolves, that anybody involved with the process would be horrified if at some of the things that could be implied by them not giving Paul Ince the job?
Well, you can draw many different conclusions as a result of him not getting the job. We're talking now about the Wolves one.
Yeah.
Is that what the one you referred to?
Yeah, well, that was the one you referred to.
That's the one that was an interview and a process. But what I'm saying is that there are many people who go through processes. And very often when you walk through a door for an interview, you make eyeball contact and you know whether you're going to get that job or not. Because they look at you and you look at them and you think, hey, they don't like me. And most important, they're sitting there looking at you walking in and thinking, hey, this is not the right person. But in football, it is about who you know already. I mean, look, the next England manager has already been chosen, hasn't he?
Yeah, well,
was there a black name? You look at any management job that's coming up in football, and there are names in the frame. The media actually did it. I go back to the mid-1990s when Gary Lineker said, I'm packing up playing football in Japan, and all the media said the BBC are going to give him a job anchoring as Bob Wilson leaves, the football focus, and on to greater things. And so it was. Where were the black opportunities for black people?
I just got to say, though, when the Charlton job first came up, everybody thought that Dennis Wise was going to get it because he's very good friends with the chairman. And Chris Powell kind of, I don't know if it is a great political move by Charlton, but, Chris Powell is a Charlton legend, so it seems very obvious. But everyone did think that Dennis Wise was going to get that job. Everyone thought it was a shoo-in for Wisey to get that job.
But as Paul Elliott said, the leadership comes from the chairman of that club, or the chief executive, and Peter Varney is an excellent leader, someone who's very fair-minded, who can see the future, who recognises the importance of fairness. And I think all those things go together to make a good leader who's going to help to transform the fortunes of a club like Charlton, where it is, because it's got a potentially big fan base that is going to tap into it. It's had a great record of challenging racism and exclusion. And that's where you get a decision like that being made. Recognising talent, giving someone a chance, and not excluding them because you've got that. You've got the established traditional culture ingrained in you that you know who it is. It's going to be your Dennis Wise, the automatic one, as opposed to Chris. And so it was. We're all very delighted for him. The results are not going so well now. We just hope that that's not going to be a signal for short-sightedness once again in termination. But it is very important that he's given an opportunity, and it's for him to grab that, and it's for us to support him.
I think it's great. I think it's great as well. I think it's great for Chris as well, who made it publicly known that he wanted to go into management, and he was also doing his coaching at Leicester. But there was you got a lot of support publicly to say that this is a guy that's going to have a go to go into coaching and management. So he was really laying the groundwork so that when the opportunity presented himself, he could say, well, hang on. Not only have I been a top player, international player, but I've also been doing my qualifications, and I am suited to the job. And on that basis, I'm sure that's why they appointed him.
Yeah, Brenda, I mean, something else quite important to add into that is that Chris Powell learned a lot of his trade coaching alongside Alan Pardew. And Alan Pardew in 2007 actually came out and said he has absolutely no doubt that Chris Powell will go on to become a coach and be a good coach. And he said that the lack of black coaches in the game here in England reflects badly on the game. Now, if Alan Pardew, as his boss at the time, was giving him that belief and that encouragement, that's why Chris Powell thought, I'm going to go and do my badges because I am going to get a job at the end of this. Whereas the story from doing the documentary that I'm hearing from a lot of people are, they're not getting that same kind of push.
You need that Pardew belief from the men that make the decisions, though, don't you, as well? I mean, Alan Pardew couldn't give Chris a job, though. Do you know what I mean? So you need the decision makers to have that sort of belief, as they had in the players many years ago.
But I think we also have to say that Charlton appointed the best person for that job, and it happened to be Chris Powell.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the just on that, Brendan. I mean, when I was saying to the guys in the studio, when I saw Chris Powell appointed as Charlton manager, I didn't think that's great a black manager's been appointed. I thought that's great Chris Powell's been appointed because he's done all his badges, he's a Charlton legend and he deserves the job.
Yeah, and also that's why we need to have, as Herman has mentioned, we need to have that critical mass of black players who are well qualified, so that when opportunities present themselves, they can put in their application. Now, the important thing thereafter is that they've got to be given a chance for an interview. Now, a lot of white coaches say and managers say we don't even get a response, we don't get an interview, but it's so disproportionate when it comes to the black players looking for job opportunities.
I guess thank Lord Ousley. We're going to have to move on. Chair of Kick It Out, thank you very much for joining us. In the studio with me this evening, I've got Rodney Hines, sports editor of The Voice, Paul Elliott, ex-Chelsea captain and from Kick It Out, Spoonie, who made the documentary, Brendan Batson is in Birmingham. Plenty more to discuss after the news, and we'll also talk to a black player who's doing his coaching badges at the moment. 0500 909 693 is our number. The lines are open. We'll take your calls. 85058 on the text. First at 9:31. Here's Kate Williams.
Online at bbc.co.uk/5live. This is BBC Radio 5 Live.
Rebel. Good evening, this is Mark Chapman with 5 Live Sport. Adil Ray follows at 10:30, and between now and then we're talking about why there are so few black football managers in the UK. Spoonie did the documentary that you heard between 8 and 9. He's in the studio with me, as is Paul Elliott, ex-Chelsea captain from Kick It Out, Rodney Hines, the sports editor of The Voice, and Brendan Batson, the FA consultant for the Equality Department, is in Birmingham. Jed in Wappy on the text, Les Ferdinand said it, he's got it too cosy. Most are financially okay and don't need the work, which is a case for both black and white players from the 90s onwards, isn't it, I suppose? Lee in York, the discussion on the lack of black managers in the UK. Well, did last night's England game against Ghana not prove it's a world football problem? African teams have mainly white managers, as one of the people on the show has summed up already. Let's talk to a player who is doing his coaching badges at the moment, the Blackpool striker Jason Newell, currently on loan at Doncaster. Evening, Jason.
Good evening.
So, where do we begin? Why did you want to do your coaching badges, and who encouraged you to do them?
It's always something that I've wanted to do. I look at it as something which I want to give back to the next generation of footballers, either if it is black or white. But for me, it's something that I feel that I can offer for when I finish playing football, and it's an opportunity as well for me to go and follow in the path of the situation right now with Chris Powell and Paul Ince. Again, we've got to look at people that have paved the way, and it's something which I thought I could probably do as well.
Are they role models to you, Paul Ince, Chris Powell?
Yeah, definitely. I think you've got to look at it as the guys were saying earlier, in the earlier days when the black players first made the appearance on the football pitch, and now with the two guys that are in the job at the moment, I think that should still look for my era as if that's something that they can do that I can go and do as well. And I'm hoping that there are a few other players that look to want to do that as well.
How many black players are on your course?
Again, it's at the moment it's different because over a period of time it changes. There's people that do drop in, people that do drop out, and people that start later.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's not always about who's doing it right this second.
Okay.
It's who's done it previously and maybe haven't got the opportunity right now, or there's those that are probably just starting and that want to do that. So I look at it that it's not always about now, it's always about what we can do or what can happen in the next coming months rather than the 15 years I heard that got mentioned earlier.
The last coaching session course that you went on, were you the only black player?
No, I actually done... Rod Wallace was on it. Paul Davies actually took me on that. And there were a few that were doing the level 2 at the time. There was Gavin Mann, Marcus Gow. So there was a few black players that are there, getting from sort of my era of playing, that are looking to want to stay in the game and give the knowledge from what they've taught to others growing up.
Can I ask you what you think of this? Cyril Regis said this a few years ago. As a player, racism is tangible. You can hear the chants, see the bananas on the pitch, but when you put in applications, you can't really tell somebody's heart. Would that worry you when it comes to applying for a job?
No, it wouldn't. It wouldn't worry me. I think it's going down to the person that you are, and for someone like Cyril, I think he overcome that. I don't think he let that affect him, and it's something which is people are looking at is why are black players or black managers not doing that? Is it because of what the pressures or what might come with it? It is a 24-hour job. Maybe some probably says a lot more than that. I think it's something that they want to do as a passion, and I think that I would want to thrive on that and wanting to make a difference.
You heard just before the news when we were talking about Chris Powell, and it was suggested that when Chris Powell started coaching, Alan Pardew's comments about him becoming a manager or that he would make a good manager helped Chris Powell a lot when it came to getting his first job. Do you feel that you will need the support of an Ian Holloway or a Sean O'Driscoll at Doncaster to talk about your coaching credentials to actually make somebody sit up and give you an interview?
I would say yes and no, because I think that's just in the way of how football is anyway. If it's going into that next stage of management, I think even as a player making a transfer, there are chairmen and managers that make the phone calls and to find out what this person's like, what their character's like, would they fit in. And I would hope that managers I've played under or players that I've worked with would help me on that. But again, it's going to be going down to me and what I can offer. Again, sometimes the little help from other managers or players can sometimes sway a chairman or a manager or whoever is going to be the person looking to employ you.
Jason, really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much.
Paul.
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, Jason's made some very good points. I think one of the key points there when he said Paul Davis. Now, Paul Davis is an outstanding coach educator, and he does some fantastic work for the PFA. And what he does, when we talk about role models, he's an excellent role model as a coach per se. Highly qualified, vastly experienced, and I remember speaking to Paul some time ago, and he said one of the difference it makes because he actually goes out and welcomes people. He actually talks to people, he engages with young black players and say, come into the game, because the fact of the matter is the current generation, a lot of them are very, very wealthy and they don't need it. And that's understandable, that's their choice. But there's those that aren't.
That can't be the only reason.
No, that's not, because obviously they're looking, institutionally, are they really going to get that opportunity? Is it worth investing that time, energy, 4 or 5 years, get all your badges and then get your way for pro license if there's going to be nothing at the end of it? Or you can have that equality of opportunity to try and become a coach. So I think, that the PFA, one thing that they show, it's leadership. That's very, very intrinsically important. And I think that's where Paul Davis, for me, is an excellent role model, does fantastically well. And I think you need another one of him in another part of the country as well, because I think he really makes such a sustained positive difference.
Gus has sent this in on the text, aimed at you, Spoonie, so you can answer this first. I think Brendan would be very good to answer this as well. He says, do you agree black people need to infiltrate the boards of the clubs in order to stand a chance of changing things?
Well, this is one of the things. One of the key things I took out of this was if it's not infiltrating the boards as in to be on there, it's educating the boards. And I think my one buzzword would be education, because I think it's all about changing the mindset. And I think when Jason just spoke about Sean O'Driscoll at Doncaster and Ian Holloway at Blackpool and Alan Pardew recommending Chris Powell, it's the fact that these guys actually played and spent a lot of their career alongside black players. So they've already had that education that these guys are capable of understanding instruction, assimilating that instruction, therefore being able to coach and understand things and feed that back down the line. It's not always going to be the same at board level because the chairman and owners are a little bit more detached. They're not really in the trenches.
Okay, I'll come to Brendan in a second. Rodney,
I remember having a conversation with the late Keith Alexander, someone that we all knew and was obviously a role model himself. And one of the conversations I had with him was the fact that he believed that if there was some financial clout within the black community to buy a football club, for example, then while it might not be necessarily the way you'd always want to go, you could then employ, hire and fire as you saw fit. and you could still put people in the shop window for the bigger picture. You know,
But I mean,
a bit
you know-
revolutionary, I know, but you're talking about the decision makers, the people that run the clubs at board and at management level. Those are the people. You know, it's great to hear Jason, but wouldn't it be wonderful to hear from maybe a chief executive or a chairman just to give their view on the hiring, firing, or the application system?
For me, it's not even about the colour of the skin of the owners. It's about their mindset.
You see,
It's
listen,
education.
John Barnes, I interviewed him a few years ago, and he said, listen, as long as there's racism in society, why should we think there's not an issue in football?
Well, for sure.
Is that too easy to dismiss?
But I think also, I mean, to broaden this slightly, because I mean, I attended on behalf of Kick It Out UEFA Fair, marshalled superbly by Pierre Parr and the FA in December 2009. It was a seminar on institutional racism within sport, and it was a fascinating insight into the mindsets, and some very intelligent people spoke there about the issues. And I think, you know, what UEFA's done something. They've showed a historic decision to quote a place for a female in their executive committee. And I think, you know, Michel Platini, I mean, he's acutely aware of the lack of representation, you know, from black representation, from minority ethnics and women within the boardroom structures. And they're very, very keen to make their boards far more inclusive, far more diverse, have far more women, the same areas that Herman Ousley had articulated very, very well. So I think there's a potential change. And I think, you know, he has actually written to all the FAs, and our FA inclusive in this country, say, hey, we need to have more footballing people, we need to have more people from the minority ethnic community, and also, you know, a greater visibility on UEFA's boards. So I think there's an incremental change which is going to take time, but I think we need to have more visibility, not just within coaching, but within the whole structures of the game.
Brendan, along with Paul, you work the corridors of power more than anybody else in this discussion. Do you feel at times like you're banging your head against a brick wall when it comes to equality, Brendan?
No, I think it's been such a long journey that I never get disappointed. I always think that somebody's going to come along, take up the baton, and we'll make improvements. Slow, but there'll be improvements. Diversity is a wonderful thing. You know, society has benefited from diversity. And, you know, if people can embrace it even more so and look to accelerate the process, terrific. But we live in the real world. Institutions don't change readily. Now, Herman has got greater experience of stuff like that, but I have seen things working so slowly, but suddenly you almost have like a eureka moment when something changes. And I think we have to be, I mean, listen to Jason. I think he's been so positive, and I hope there's many more like him waiting to come through. And that's part of our jobs, all of us here who are speaking, is to encourage that next generation or the current generation and say, look, you know, you have a go at it, but get yourself well prepared. Paul has mentioned Paul Davis. You know, doing a fantastic job. But what we need to do is improve the level of qualifications that the current black coaches have. Level 1, level 2, that's the gateway. We need to have better qualified people at a higher level. Now, I mentioned Noel Blake, for instance, who has been through a whole gamut and now finds himself with the under-19 development team at the FA. We need to promote people like Noel a lot more than we're doing at the moment.
When you say promote, in what sense? Get them out and about and spreading the message.
Role models. Rather than somebody like me talking about things anecdotally, when I've been to sort of consultation meetings with black coaches, I like to have someone like Noel Blake, anybody like that who's got a story to tell. Chris Ramsey's got a fantastic story to tell of how he's arrived in his position at Tottenham. And you need people like that in front of those groups to say, this has been my journey.
Brendan, you know when you talk about people doing the level 1 and the level 2, and that's the gateway, but then they don't go further.
Yeah.
Do you have figures that shows percentage-wise how many black players drop out as opposed to white players from level 1 and 2?
No, we don't have that. I mean, as part of the scholarships, the young lads who come through at 16 and 19, they have to go through that process. So they're all coming out with level 2 qualifications. We don't have reliable data, and we haven't done that sort of research. But really, look, the figures don't lie, the numbers don't lie, and what we see with our own eyes. Now, all of us in the black community involved in football, we literally can name you, obviously, the 2 managers, but also the coaches that are involved in the game. Just down the road here from where I'm speaking, you know, I've had a lad who's been in the post for probably over 10 years, Terry Connor, at Wolves. You know, now that might be where he wants to be, and he's doing a fantastic job. But I think we have to look more positively and say, can we encourage the current generation, the next generation, and say, there are opportunities out there, but prepare yourself to begin with. We need to widen that talent pool of highly qualified coaches from the black community.
I mean, the thing for me, Brendan, from doing the documentary and speaking to everybody, that as well as having individuals like Jason Ewell, like Andrew Cole doing his badges and Les Ferdinand doing their badges, we still very much need the governing body of football here, the FA, to take this up as an issue, to address it, because like Alan Pardew, I honestly believe that I don't think it reflects very well on our game here, especially when there have been so many black players that have contributed so positively to not only their club sides but the national side, that these same guys can have something to offer on the coaching side as well. And you know, for all my work and travelling around the world, you know, we live in one of the most cosmopolitan, diverse, inclusive nations in the world, but yet our football game seems to be stuck at times in the dark ages. And all I'm saying is, this needs to be looked at. You know, we're a great nation. Why is there such a disparity between those playing and those coaching? Let's
talk about the Rooney Rule, shall we? Which you mentioned and talked about in the documentary, Spoonie. Do you want to just remind people what the Rooney Rule is before we discuss it further? Okay, it's an initiative which was brought into the USA, into the NFL, their National Football League, or American football as we call it, in 2003. And basically, the rule instructs all NFL clubs that if they're advertising, if they're appointing a major post, they have to interview at least one ethnic minority. Now, they don't have to do it if they're appointing from within, right? And they don't have to do it if they're giving it to a black person who was, say, defensive coach and he gets the head coach job. They don't have to then advertise. But if they're advertising for an outside person to come in, they are required by law to interview an ethnic minority. In the documentary, we heard the PFA Chief Executive Gordon Taylor said he was happy to call for a Rooney Rule if that's what black managers and players wanted. Gordon joins us now. Evening, Gordon.
Good evening, Mark. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening. If you were to call for it, how would you go about doing it?
Well, the thing is, the same with our anti-racism campaigns. I was very fortunate, you know, to have people like Brendan, Paul Elliott, Garth Crooks, because I felt there was one or two occasions when we needed to go more public before we joined up with the Commission for Racial Equality and kick it out, and even, you know, ask the players to leave the pitch. I felt it had got that bad. Almost akin to what happened when England played Spain, which was so encouraging on the progress we'd made in England, because there was a general national uproar when our black players in the England team were booed badly and abused in Spain, and I thought that was indicative of the progress we've made. But when it happened to black players, they said, Gordon, you know, they felt embarrassed to some extent by that and wanted to be proved as footballers in their own right. It's only perhaps when even more black players came in, particularly once the Premier League had got going and more players came in from abroad, that there was a confidence then that they had. And I just wondered now, I just feel I've got to consult with my black members, because I've always felt comfortable with them, feel they've got so much to add to the game, and try to reason out the reasoning behind why so many good players, you talk of the Les Ferdinands, Andrew Coles, I had to try and work really hard with Chris Powell to try and encourage him to be that role model, because I'd experienced him as chair of the PFA, and he was a tremendous person, tremendous knowledge of the game, been playing in every division, and he was quite concerned, like Andy Cole was, to try and encourage him to take his coaching badge. And that's for a reason, because they don't feel they're being given the opportunities now, whether that's the ownership of the club, the culture of our country, and yet I do hear what you say, that we're multicultural. And I just think, again, like Lord Ousley said, I was amazed last night. Ghana was there. You know, Chris Hughton's father was born in Ghana. They booed when Danny Welbeck came on because he'd not chosen to play for Ghana. And yet there was no disrespect, the Serbian Stefanovic, a white coach, and you think they had such a belief in the culture. They were dressed in the colours of the country, fantastic atmosphere, and I just thought, if they can't do it themselves, no wonder it's a problem.
If you were to call for a Rooney Rule, Gordon, I mean, how viable would it be legally, and also how would you go about discussing it with the footballing powers that be that we've already already discussed really don't have black people at the top of their organisations?
It was the same approach with the kick it out. Many clubs said no racism problem here until you looked how many players they'd recruited, and then gradually it's been a process of education. And I feel, I would feel confident that we could introduce the rule. And when you look at our own politicians, they make special specific rules for politics. If they're interviewing for a local MP, they need to have they need to look again at any ethnic minority, at females, for example, and they do this for politics, and they do it in the House of Commons, and they do it for so many other different areas now. Why not football?
I mean, Gordon, for me, the fundamental difference between the American setup, this is Spoonie here, by the way, sorry.
Yes,
their setup and ours is that the NFL teams have to, the owners apply to the NFL to own the franchise for the club. So, so that central body instructs down. Whereas here, it'd be very difficult for the FA to turn around to the owners of, the Glazer family to say
to get the owners with you. But I mean, we deal a collective bargaining agreement on behalf of all players. We don't need to. I do sound out my players, but we have a management committee. They're democratically elected. We make moves on behalf of all players, and we agree with the Premier League, the chairman of the Premier League, the chief exec, Richard Scudamore. Similarly at the Football League with Greg Clark, Andy Williamson. The same with the Football Association. And I feel if things don't start improving, I think that's somewhere we've got to go, because anybody who's watched, we've got to learn from other sports and other countries. And when you saw how many top-quality black gridiron players there were and how few black coaches, and they came in with that rule, and without any shadow of doubt, that's made a difference, and we've seen that difference, and now it's become assimilated into the culture of the NFL.
Cyrus Mary, the lawyer who put the Rooney Rule together and was in that documentary, actually said in the documentary that he would come over and he would meet with people and he would explain how they did it there if it was something that was wanted over here. Would you invite him over then?
I'd be very pleased to invite him over, because we have a Black Coaches Forum. This has been on our agenda, and I really don't think enough progress has been made, and neither has enough progress been made on the football field with encouraging Asian players to be involved when you consider, what percentage they're involved in our country. But on this issue that we're talking about, to focus directly on it, yes, I think so, but I would only want to do that if I felt encouraged by all my black players or black players who qualified coaches and feel they've not been given proper opportunities. And I think they do feel that the time is right towards that now, because there's some standout cases. I find it astonishing that we could import the likes of Janty Garner and Ruud Gullit and not have a problem there, yet when we've got our own lads who've grown up in this country not given a proper chance to be fairly represented. We had to work hard with Paul Ince. That was the sign of how things changed. Paul Ince should have been fully qualified when he got the Blackburn job. I speak to Richard Scudamore and said, Richard, we've got to give him a chance. We promised that, we'll fast-track him, get him qualified. I said, we don't want to make a scene about it, but we would do if we need to, but I hope you'll agree. And he said, Gordon, I agree. We'll do all we can.
I mean, the thing for me there, Gordon, is the thing of racism, it isn't going to happen overnight. We agree that changing mindsets, cultures, years of practice is going to take a long time. But 8 years ago, there was 20% black players and 4 managers. 8 years on, there's 25% playing and 2 black managers. So in real terms, we're actually going backwards.
I wouldn't disagree with that, and I can't disagree with that. And I, like you, couldn't understand. I can't understand a lot of managerial sackings, but how anybody at Newcastle could possibly think that Chris Hughton hadn't done a good job for them is beyond belief. And you tend to think that's not to do with racism. You've got to be careful what you say, because we don't have any direct proof. But I think it was Brendan who said it. If anybody else who'd done what he did would probably have, been more than welcomed and given a big contract. And I feel that's fine. That might be the perception, but perception is based on the evidence in front of your eyes, and I agree with you that it's just an unfair representation. When I say unfair, I mean it, because the contribution that black players have made to the game on the field, with the quality of skills, the contribution black players have made in my own organisation that I'm paid to look after, the PFA, has been immense, and yet they're not allowed to do that in the coaching and managing side of the game.
Gordon, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
The PFA Chief Executive, Gordon Taylor, there. We'll look at more solutions after 10 o'clock, and then at 10:30 it's Adil Ray. Evening, Adil.
Hi, mate. Yeah, what have we got on the show today? Following the situation in Japan tonight, we're asking, is it time to rethink Britain's policy on nuclear energy? Also, Sir Alex Ferguson has condemned the decision to play this season's FA Cup semi-finals at Wembley, predicting it will be absolute chaos. You've got Liverpool playing Arsenal the same day in the London Marathon. So we're asking, is it OK to expect some of the clubs from the north, the Stokes and the Boltons, to go down to Wembley? Or is that what it should be like, to get that Wembley experience? Want your calls on that. Also, massive cricket game today, of course, India versus Pakistan. We're talking sporting superstitions, chappers. I wonder whether you've got one. Mine is that I sat on the toilet today when the second wicket went for Pakistan.
Too much information.
And I know,
I've heard,
but a lot of my friends then said I had to stay on the toilet then for the rest of the game. But I tried, it didn't really work out.
The bank his shirt on until he walked on stage. I'd start doing that at university. Until we played away at Salford University, and the dressing room was about a mile away from the pitch, and it was a February Saturday afternoon, and I stopped that superstition
and to be
straight
fair,
after that.
Paul looked quite good with his shirt off as well. That's the other thing, isn't it? Really?
I don't know.
Yeah.
0500 909 693, text 85058. It'd be great to hear from you at 10:30.
Somebody's just said that they're quite glad that I don't keep that superstition up now and do it as I come from the office to the studio. And
I thought you was going to say it was your missus.
No. Yeah, she'd prefer me fully clothed all the time. 85058 on the text. 0500 909 693 is the number. We'll take more of your calls about why there are so few black managers in UK football after Kate Williams with the BBC News.
Online at bbc.co.uk/5live. This is BBC Radio 5 Live. The Libyan...
Good evening, this is 5 Live Sport. I'm Mark Chapman. We're discussing all the points made in the Total Blackout documentary earlier about why there are so few black managers in the UK. Spoonie made the documentary. He's still with me, as is Paul Elliott from Kick It Out, Rodney Hines, sports editor of The Voice, and Brendan Batson, who's an FA consultant for the Equality Department. Brendan is in Birmingham. We were talking about the Rooney Rule before, which is in the NFL, where all teams, franchises, have to interview at least one candidate from an ethnic minority if the position of head coach becomes vacant. Mr. Tullock on the text, my profession is in education. Even though this is the 21st century, we still have a long way to go. Having two black managers is a start. The American model is an interesting one. Hassan, I think the answer has to be the Rooney Rule with the public support of the Players' Union. The current situation is just plain embarrassing. 85058 on the text, 0500 909 693. Brendan, does the Rooney Rule concern you in any way? Could you see it being divisive?
No, I don't think it'll be divisive. I mean, when we first talked about this back end of 2009, I think the way it came out caused a little bit of confusion. But I think it's worth debating, because I remember hearing about this from Ricky Hill, the ex-Luton and England player. And when it was introduced, I think there's only about 3 or 4% of the head coaches were black. Now it's up to over 20%. So it's definitely had an impact, and I think it's had an impact on the other sports as well. So I definitely think, and I'm glad Gordon's gone public on this, that it's worth a debate. Now, they have different laws in America, without a doubt, we know that. So I think it's worth debating whether or not something like that can be introduced with everybody from the leagues being involved in it, because I think it will have a huge impact.
Paul?
Yeah, I mean, I see the merit of it, because I think as well that it doesn't necessarily guarantee a job. What it does encourages debate, stimulates debate, and I think that gives players opportunities then to feel more confidence that, okay, I may not get the job, but I'm going to have an opportunity to have the experience, be at the top table, an opportunity for them to demonstrate their qualities. And also as well, they may not necessarily get a job in that particular area, but they might have, because chairmen talk the same way players talk and coaches talk.
So a coach's job might come up, or a scout job.
I mean, you might have at Club A, you know, talking to a Club A chairman or board, talking to another chairman or board. MSL. I had this interview last week with this fantastic player, outstanding CV, very articulate guy, excellent coaching qualifications. I couldn't give a job, but there might be another opportunity elsewhere within the structures of the game. And I think that's another area that we have to discuss as well. So I can see the merit of it, certainly, and I think it's pleasing because, I mean, you know, Gordon, you know, coming in and speaking very articulately about it, it's all about leadership, and Gordon's obviously clearly demonstrated that consistently at the PFA, and I think that would be very welcomed, certainly, you know, to take to the next steps as far as having a discussion, you know, with the parties from America.
Would it worry you, Rodney? Is there anything in it where you could see problems?
No, I don't see any problems, but I think on the documentary it did talk about the fines system, wasn't there, for those that didn't want to adhere to it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it actually went on to say that some of those fines have been implemented.
Well, there's only one team that have been fined so far, the Detroit Lions. They got fined $200,000, and the NFL said if it happens again, the next team are going to get fined $500,000.
But it's not happened since, has it?
No, well, it seems then that obviously over there everyone's batting from the same.
But I think you've got to have the buy-in of all the stakeholders within the game. Obviously,
Absolutely.
it can be led. I mean, Gordon has made his point.
And Spoonie, you said that they couldn't operate those clubs out there unless they were part of that affiliation.
Well,
and got the green light from the top brass.
I think out of the 32 NFL clubs, there are 6 that were opposed to it.
Yeah.
But NFL said, well, if you're
opposed to it, you probably won't.
We hear what you're saying, but it's just kind of too bad.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing for the greater good of our game.
And that sort of execution is probably what's going to be required if it's going to be brought in. There might be some resistance, obviously, but if it's the only way to play and progress, I think everyone's going to wise up to that.
The first step is let's have a debate about it. That's the first step, isn't it?
Brendan, which hopefully we're starting. Brendan, what do you make about Richard Bevan's comments, the Chief Executive of the League Managers Association, about the National Football Centre, which he says will create a clearer management pathway?
Well, I think what they're looking to introduce, and they do it, they have the LMA certificate, the manager's certificate at Warwick University, is you're looking at management in its broadest sense. Obviously, you've got the football side, but there's also a business side that managers have to become au fait with now. So they're looking to expand a business model into football management. And there's no question that the St George's Park, when it comes online, comes on stream, will be the state of the art. All the courses will be held there. There will be opportunities in terms of people furthering their qualifications in a much more sort of professional surrounding.
Which is where clubs could then go to pick up a bright young manager at the start of their career.
Well, no, I think certainly it will encourage, hopefully will encourage more people, certainly from the BME community, to look to further their coaching qualifications, and then, hopefully make themselves better candidates when job opportunities present themselves.
See, Paul, you played football in Italy. There is a coaching management centre in Italy where all the greats have gone. Admittedly, it hasn't led to black managers and coaches in Italy. But if there is that one focal point where everybody knows they can go to do their badges and improve their education and business acumen, then can you see it that making it a clearer management path?
I think it will be helpful. It adds value because I think continuity is important. Continuity and stability equals success, and it's like having your own home, isn't it? And I think it's well overdue because I think for the way that the history of our game, and we don't actually have our own national centre, I think it's nothing short of inconceivable. So I can see, in truth, there is a vision there. It's about implementation of that vision. It's certainly underway, and I think it will add a tremendous amount of value.
I've asked for your phone calls this evening. We can talk to Joss now. Evening, Joss.
Evening.
Evening. What's your point that you'd like to put to the panel on this subject?
Well, a good evening to you all, and some people in the studio I'm known to. Joss, I'm sure Brendan.
Evening,
well.
Josh. Yes.
How are you?
Yes, Josh. I'm all right.
Paul as well. How are you?
Good evening, Josh.
Good evening.
Nice to hear from you.
Evening, Josh.
Evening. All I can say is, I'm a grassroots man, and I always call you gentlemen our talented 10%, our professional cousins. And in order for us to reach that nirvana, that heaven, if you like, it's going to require this country's black business to buy a club to create that pathway. it's going to have to take some sort of serious action by the black community as a whole, notwithstanding all the other initiatives that are going on. I buy into the arguments around mindsets and changing the boardroom mindsets, but I think most of you all know what happens in those boardrooms and the culture around it. I think a former player talked about it earlier, the drinking culture, the mentality of business and chairmen who are detached from the game in terms of the day-to-day operation. It is going to require black business, put the money in, buy a club that's established. They've not got to go through the pyramid nonsense that can take forever, and actually create that pathway to actually prove that our black players that are not only good in goal and can play centre midfield, but actually can run clubs, can manage clubs, and also administer clubs. Because this issue you're talking about...
Sorry, Joe, I mean, just to jump in there, right? Albeit I think it's a great argument for empowering black people with regards to business ownership. In reality, that club will actually only give one manager